All right, welcome everyone. Hope everyone is having a good start to their week and had a good President's Day weekend. We had a break last week, and 2 weeks ago was my first lesson of this mini series or of this series. So glad to have everyone back here. And then for those of you who were not here 2 weeks ago, I'll give a brief introduction to what this series is before we get into the games for today. So 2 weeks ago, we started the series, which is my 2023 tournament experiences, basically going through the tournaments that I had in 2023 and the psychology that I changed up a little bit to have the successes that I did in 2023. The preparation that went into each and every tournament, each and every game, and then also going through the critical moments through the games and the instructional kind of themes that came up. So 2 weeks ago, we went over my first tournament success of 2023, which was back in February of 2023, where I made my first GM norm. Very exciting tournament. And what would be the start of a very successful year. So fast forward a little bit here, we're going to be looking at the tournament American Continental, which was in May of last year in the Dominican Republic. So in March and April, I took a little bit of my gas off the pedal in terms of tournaments. I only played one tournament in March, one tournament in April. Both went fairly mediocre. Lost 5 in one, gained 5 in the other in terms of FIDE rating. And so we now get to the American Continental Championships, where it's a norm tournament, 11 rounds, more or less one round a day, which is definitely a different type of scenery than a lot of you guys are familiar with in the U.S. Most of the U.S. tournaments are 90 plus 30-second increment, 2 games a day, and, not much time for rest. And so going to the tournament, I was now rated 2391 FIDE with 1 norm. Didn't have too many expectations for the tournament. I was mostly going to, obviously put forth my best results, but it was a fun experience. And not oftentimes you get to go outside the United States to play, and especially, like I said, for a tournament where there would be 1 game a day. And so I actually did have an article featured in the American Chess Magazine as well as US Chess Life. So for those of you who read those two magazines, perhaps have seen some of these games highlighted. But hopefully I can go a little bit more in depth, as well as, maybe not all the ideas are too fresh. This was some time ago. So I got to the tournament one day. I think it was either 1 or 2 days before the tournament, which is a very important thing. Getting to the tournament early, if possible. It's not always possible, but if possible, it's a good way to get well rested and acquainted with your surroundings, especially if it's in a different country. So I got there. I went with a good friend of mine. I am Alexander Ostrovsky, who's another U.S. Chess School alumni as well as coach. And we got there, got to our rooms, kind of explored the hotel, it was kind of on a resort along the beach. And so, we discovered, what food we'd be eating, what we'd be doing with our free time. And honestly, that was a very, very big realization for me during this tournament, was not only is the chess preparation as well as the mental preparation or even the physical preparation for our tournament, not only is that all important, but also the actual routine that you get going during an event is very, very important. So that could be when you go to sleep, what time you wake up, what time you eat food, what time you take rest. And so for this tournament in particular, it was the first tournament, honestly, that I even remember where I was able to get a very strict routine. Okay. And in previous tournaments, even the tournament where I made a GM norm, I'm a pretty late sleeper. I was sleeping around maybe like sometimes 1, 2 a.m. And sometimes even in the past when I was a bit younger, I would sometimes, even sleep at 3 or 4 a.m. That's just kind of who I am, late sleeper. It's not a good habit, but it was a habit that I had. But in this tournament, every single night I was sleeping at the latest midnight. And so after my, solid 8 hours of sleep, I would wake up at 8 a.m. and then go to breakfast. The food was great there, so I'd go to breakfast. And then the games actually for this tournament, most of them, the ones that were on one game a day, the games were at I think it was around 4. So that actually gave us time to have breakfast, and then we would do a little bit of preparation, like opening preparation for our opponents, because you would have the pairings ahead of time. And then we'd get lunch, and then we'd actually do a little bit of sports before we sports. So we did some like pool volleyball, we did some basketball, we did some tennis. I'm a bit of a sporty guy, so I like doing some sports when I can at tournaments too. And then after that, we'd take a shower and then do a little bit of preparation before the game and make sure we're well rested for our 4 p.m. game. And then the game would happen. The game would be 3-4 hours long. So that would go till around 8 p.m. Then we get dinner. And then at night, actually, the festivities did not stop. Me and Alex, we'd go play some ping pong around 9 to 10 p.m. And then right before we slept, we'd also tune in to watch the NBA playoffs that were going on. And then we slept. And like I said, no later than midnight. So obviously, at most tournaments, you will not have this type of luxury in terms of that much time to have rest and whatnot. But even in a 2-game a day, you won't have time for sports. You won't have time for watching the NBA playoffs. But hopefully, you still have enough time to go to sleep early, wake up early, get your food in, make sure you're well rested. And it honestly is something that I very much so underestimated. And as we go through this series, there, as I've mentioned, were some tournaments that I didn't do so well in. Even in 2023, where I had a very successful year, there was some tournaments I did very poorly in. And one thing I realized was my poor regimen, my poor kind of sleep schedule as well as eating schedule was really affecting my mental state during the games. And beyond, like I said, the chess preparation that you can do before the tournament, the ability to put yourself in the best mental state for each and every game is a very, very important process. So that was just a little bit of a side before we went into the chess. Hopefully it's something that you guys all, are very mature and have implemented into your tournaments, but it's something that I didn't realize, at least I didn't internalize until fairly recently as something that's very, very important to have down for tournament play. All right, well, let's get to the tournament itself. So round 1, this is my round 2 game, but in round 1, I played at 1900 feet. I'm all going to be talking about FIDE rating. All these tournaments are FIDE rated events. So round 1, I played at 1900 FIDE with black, had a fairly routine game. So we're not going to be taking a look at that today. But now we get to round 2. So round 2, I had the white pieces against Alexander Bettinelli, FIDE master from Minnesota. A little bit of an older guy. But he really gave me a run for my money, played a very solid Queen's Gambit declined in the opening, and I got a very, very small advantage. And at some point in the rook and pawn ending, I actually had missed a win, but that's not what we're going to be looking at. Okay. So we get all the way to the end of this end game. I think it's around move like 60 or 70 by now. We're one of the last games in the tournament hall. And it's actually black to play here. Unfortunately, it's not white to play. Otherwise, white could take this b pawn and be completely winning. And black goes b5. Okay. So this is going to be the first moment where we're going to stop. Okay. So it does appear that black is trading off a set of pawns and will likely trade into a very drawish rook and pawn ending. And so your task here is to make black's drawing path as difficult as possible. Something to keep in mind here is that we are very, very close to the end of the game. At this point, I think I had around 15 minutes, if I remember correctly, and my opponent had like 30 seconds. And so what's very important to do in those scenarios, when you have a little bit of extra time and your opponent is down to their final seconds, is to take a little bit of time in this position right here, what we're going to do now, and try to figure out a path forward to throw some tricks in there to make your opponent's life as difficult as possible. Okay, so white to play. I'll give you guys a couple minutes here. I'm gonna let's say two. I'm gonna go 2 to 3 minutes around here, and find some ideas for white. How should white proceed? And like I said, it's trying to make your opponent's life as difficult as possible. Black's holding job as difficult as possible. Also, remember, please send your answers to me directly and not to everyone, just so that everyone has a chance to send their answers in unhindered. All right, give everyone 30 more seconds. Okay, so seeing a lot of good answers. Apologies if the share screen had cut off. I'd put a pause to the share screen, which usually keeps it up. And I saw everyone was sending their answers in, so I assumed it was still working. So if it cut off for some people, my apologies. But getting a lot of answers in the chat. I'm liking what I'm seeing. A lot of good, decent ideas, a lot of good ideas. Now keep in mind, this is objectively drawn. I mean, of course, I didn't know that during the game, although I had a feeling that was the case. And so a lot of your guys' variations are working under assumptions that, Black is either already lost, so he has to be desperate, or, has to try very hard to make something happen. But the natural state of this position is it is drawn. And so what your job is here, like I said, is to make your opponent's life as difficult as possible, to try to find some tricks if you can. So a lot of people gave a takes b5 as the path forward. Now, this is a fine move, of course. Black will naturally take back, and then a lot of people gave king b2. Very natural move, defending the b3 pawn, getting the king into the game. I mean, if you're going to win this rook and pawn ending, you're going to need the king to be as far advanced as possible. Now, Black here, a lot of people were giving rook to c5, which is, a good idea. Basically, Black is trying to get the king this way to try to get in front of the pawn to set up a fielder defense. And of course, if rook takes c5, king takes c5, this is a drawn king and pawn ending. But a lot of people were noting that rook d5 is a very tricky move here for white. And if Black were to continue this same idea with rook to d5, takes, king a3 is the way forward to win. After king c5, king a4, and now this endgame is winning. After king to c6, important that you don't go king b4 because of king b6, but instead you go king a5. So this is a little bit tricky here. However, black is by no means obliged to play rook to c5. And as Greg mentioned, it seems like maybe some people were not aware of the frontal defense. Black can simply slide the rook back to rook to b8 or rook to b7. And the issue here is as we mentioned, if white is to try to get this king out into the game and support the pawn's advance, for example, something like king to a3, and already black starts giving some checks. Rook a8 check, rook to b8 check. And, black is in time to stop the king from advancing. For example, king to a4, rook e8. And here, even though white has stopped the check, the simple capture is followed by king c3, and the pawn is captured. And on top of that, what I have seen in the game is that I thought that the move king d5 perhaps is also another straightforward way for black to play. Because if now rook c4 to try to continue to keep the king cut off, I believe now rook c5 is available. And now this king can immediately come back. King can come to c6, now to b6, and our king is just way not in time to make anything happen here. So on top of the frontal defense, I thought that immediately black would be getting back to cover in front of the b pawn. The black king would come back in front of the b pawn and secure a draw. And so, like we were trying to figure out here, any sort of way to be a little bit tricky here and to cause black some issues. And so some people I saw were giving king to b2 as a possible way forward. Now, clearly, black is going to try to take this pawn. If b takes a4, obviously, rook takes a4 is a dead draw. And b4 was the main idea here, trying to take advantage of the fact that since this king is cut off on the c file, maybe we can start getting this pawn up the board and, just ignore the fact that we have conceded the a4 pawn. However, here with the king on b2, a3 check is quite annoying, and after king a2 blocking the pawn, black will move the rook back, and because black has this pawn in a3 well secured, we're not going to be able to support this pawn with our king. Hence, the trickiest move here, in fact, is king to a2. King to a2. Now after b takes a4, b4, and if the rook slides back, now there's king to a3. Stopping the pawn in its tracks on a4, so now that you'll have b5 followed by king b4 as a possibility. Not saying we're going to be playing it just yet because then the a pawn will start running, but now b4, b5 is on the cards. And keep in mind, my opponent is now down to 30 seconds still here. And so his defense has now become incredibly difficult because this is no longer some theoretically drawn endgame. Whereas we saw before, whether my opponent was aware of it or not, this position is the frontal defense on top of the potential king d5, rook c5 availability. So now let's get to the game. So king a2, definitely the best way forward to try to trick our opponent. B takes a4, b4, rook to a8, king to a3. All right, so now my opponent started to panic a little bit here. He didn't fumble it, at least not for the next few moves. And so we're going to try to see how our opponent tried to defend this game. And then I'm going to stop. The next point we're going to stop is the last chance my opponent had to hold the game. So king to e5, very natural move, trying to get the king back. And now we play b5, of course, to defend the rook on c6, as well as keep this king shielded out. If we were to kind of drop back our rook to, let's say, c1, now with the king on d6, black's defensive ideas are a little bit easier because now black will, on top of just simply staying put with the rook, like let's say rook a7, rook a8, could now play something like king to d7 followed by rook to c8 to try to get the king over once again. So b5, rook a7, as Austin was mentioning in the chat, black will try to shuffle the rook to maintain the defense of the a4 pawn. And if I were to try to play king b4 immediately, now black can go a3, and now actually white should be a little bit careful in order not to lose this somehow. Okay, so rook to c1, preparing for the pushing of the a pawn. Perhaps maybe white in the future could blockade the pawn on a1 with the rook. Now king d6, my opponent plays king b4. So eventually, I needed to bring the king into the game. We could not, blockade this a4 pawn forever. a3, b6. Okay, so eventually we were going to move the king out of the a3 square to b4, and then follow it up with b6 with the rook on a7. So here, my opponent played rook h7. The point being now is if I take with the king, rook to b7, and now black is in time to pick up the pawn. Rook to b1, king c6. So even with low time, my opponent did still have some clever ideas. However, his path towards a draw now has kind of whittled down to only moves. King to b5. Okay, so we do not take the pawn on a3. We're not greedy here. The king on d6 is still cut off, and now our king on b5 has direct access to a6 followed by b7 to achieve the Lucena position. Should black not be accurate here. Okay, so this will be the last moment we're going to stop in this game. Now, of course, my opponent in the game actually only has 30 seconds to do so, but I'll give you guys a little bit of extra time just to be a little bit generous here. We'll flip it here for black. So black to move. Okay, there's only one easy defense, or quote unquote easy defense, or direct defense that black has here in this position. Okay, so I want you guys to try to find this. So black to play. Okay, I'll give everyone 30 more seconds to send their answers in. Okay. So some of you guys ended up getting it, but others were not up to the defensive task, and it's not an easy one at that. Okay. So black in this position played the very logical rook h2, trying to get behind the king, or trying to get behind the pawn rather. I simply played b7. Passed pawns must be pushed. My opponent played rook b2 check, king a6, a2, king a7, rook to b1, and on short time, my opponent missed the fact that b8 was queen, and I'm not in fact getting checkmated by a1 rook. So this was how my opponent played. Like I said, he was on less than 30 seconds, and this is the line that he chose. But it's very, very important that black finds a way to not only get behind my pawn, but give room to check on the A file, and also make sure that the pawn on A3 is being used as leverage, is being used as a counterattacking kind of pawn for black in the position. Because the thing that happened after rook to H2, B7, rook to B2, king A6, A2, is that sure, this pawn is being threatened to be queen by rook to B1, sorry, but there is no more A file checks. And when I go king A7, rook to b1 is the only kind of option to try to queen the pawn, and then b8, unfortunately, ends the game. So the drawing continuation is actually rook to h3. I believe maybe a2 also works, but I think rook h3 was the most accurate. I don't like how the computer shows. Not a good sign that computer shows that it's not good. But rook h3, and now b7, and now we go not a2. Rook to b3 check, king a6, and is now a2. And so a2 first probably also works, but in this moment I was a bit wary of the fact that rook a1, and now black can play after rook to h2. Now after king a6, there's no more checks along a2, and so I don't really like the fact that our rook has to be tied down to the a2 pawn along this rank rather than this rank. So that's why I was thinking rook h3 first was a bit more accurate way to go forward. Yeah, so maybe it's still holding after a2, rook a1, rook to h2, but here I'm thinking that it's a bit more difficult. For example, like let's say king c6, but it's probably still holding actually. Yeah, it's still holding, because the thing is after, let's say, rook to c1 check, and now it's when we go king d7. Yeah, this is important, because if you go back to d6, now we transpose b7 and then king a7. So yeah, this is still holding. Yeah, because now after rook to c1 check, king to d7, king a7, rook to b2, b7, now rook to b1. It is a draw after takes, and then queen. So yeah, okay. So that was the main idea. So here actually, if we go king a6, rook h3, and we kind of transpose to what I was mentioning before, and so now actually white, no longer can kind of push for a win. After, for example, b7, rook to a3 check, king to b6, black can continue giving checks, because if the white king tries to go to b8, which would be the normal Lucena kind of try to get the king in front of the pawn and then create the bridge. Obviously here, black creates a queen and probably still draw, but no longer winning for white. So the important kind of note in this game, in this position, was the choice in this scenario right here to not allow black to transfer and transpose into a theoretically drawn rook endgame, given the fact that black was low on time. Because the thing is regardless of he knows it or not, it will be theoretically drawn, right, straight out of rescue. And if he does know it, even if he's on 30 seconds, it won't matter. He'll set up the frontal defense, move the rook back and forth, and he could have 1 second. He could have 5 seconds. It won't matter. And so what's important to note in these positions where you have very close to a theoretical drawn endgame, but not quite there yet, and your opponent is low on time, is that you need to try to keep the chances alive. Try to keep the practical chances alive. That's one very, very key point to make. Keep the practical chances alive. And so very devastating loss for my opponent, because he defended so well for the whole game. And then once it finally got to almost theoretically drawn territory, I was able to put that last amount of pressure on him with this king a2 idea. And I will tell you, I was very defeated in this point here as well. I was actually looking for very desperate tries. For example, like rook h6. Like if takes, then if black takes on a4, then rook h4 and we win the rook, right? Like I was that desperate at this point in the game. And so I was also very close to simply taking on b5, rook takes b5, king b2, and like, sure, okay, I'll make him like defend the frontal defense. He's an a bit older Russian gentleman, so I'm pretty sure his theoretical endgame knowledge is there. But at least it's a try. Right? But it was very important here that I gained my composure with 15 minutes left on my clock. I spent around 5 minutes here, I think it was, and then I saw it through. I was like, okay, it's key that I play king a2, not king to b2. I go king a2 here, and then that way after b takes a4, I have b4, and that way I could play king a3, and then I have my practical chances. And it led to a win in this game. putting me at 2 out of 2. A very important win because, as a lot of you guys know, in terms of Swisses, once you finally break out of that quote unquote Swiss prison and beat the lower rated players, then you get to play the higher rated players.
Yes.
So, very important. Oh, sorry. I should not stop sharing screen. Okay. So, very important win for me there, moving to 2 out of 2. In the third round, I was black against a near 2600 GM, and I held a very, very crazy game. Though, the tournament is 11 rounds, and, if I would love to go over every single game if possible, but there's many more games to highlight in this tournament that I would like to spend a little bit more time on. And so we're going to be looking now at my fourth round game. So sorry, we're going to go here. Okay. So we're going to be looking at my fourth round game now. So at this point now, it's 2.5 out of 3. I had beat 2 lower rated, drawn a 2600 with black, and now I had white pieces against Grandmaster Fidel Corrales Jimenez, who some of you guys might know. He's a very seasoned Grandmaster who lives in the United States, formerly representing Cuba, used to be 2600 FIDE himself. And actually, in the month of April, I was playing a GM round robin, and I turned out I had beaten him in a Nighter. So what came to me as a bit of a surprise, because he's not an E4, E5 player, he's a lifelong Nighter player. He played E4, E5. So he definitely surprised me with E4, E5, and I opted for the Ruy Lopez, which is my go-to these days. And one point that I will make is that it is very, very important that even if you're, let's say, preparing all day for your opponent's Nighter, or all day, he also plays some Caracal, so I was preparing for some Caracal. Even if your opponent, surprises you, plays something they've never played before, or usually never play, it's important that you still have some ideas in your back pocket. Okay, so I had some ideas in my back pocket, and I was prepared to use it for this game. And one thing I knew is that I knew, since he is not an E4, E5 player, right? He doesn't play Ruy Lopez's all day, every day. He would not be prepared for some sidelines that I had up my sleeve. Okay, so castles, bishop e7. 2 weeks ago, we saw that I had a sideline prepared against bishop to c5, and I was able to win that game basically out of the opening. So instead, bishop e7, definitely a bit more of mainstream, I guess you could call it, though everything is mainstream these days in the Ruy Lopez. Rook to e1, b5, bishop to b3, and castles. So the Marshall. And given the fact that Fidel is a Nighter player, I definitely knew that Marshall attack or Marshall gambit, Marshall attack type positions would be right up his alley. So if I were to go c3, which I could have played, and I know some lines in the Marshall, and perhaps maybe even I would know it better than he would, because I play the Ruy Lopez as white, and he doesn't necessarily play e4, e5 as black. I was not really thrilled to go into some very, very dynamic positions where it would be going straight into his kind of territory, very dynamic style positions. And, if I don't know all my theory in the Marshall, I could get into some trouble. So here I have prepared d4. A bit of an anti-Marshall and a bit of a sideline here. There's a lot of different variations here that I'm not going to go into too in depth. But if black captures via, I think, e takes d4, then we go e5, and white's much better. If knight takes d4 here, which is one of the main lines, then white goes bishop takes f7 check, rook takes f7, knight takes e5, and basically black sacrifices the pawn. So if Fidel had known this variation, I'm sure he would have gone for this. It's definitely in line of how he plays, sacrificing the pawn, and in turn, he gets the bishop pair. Now black goes c5, or bishop to b7, I guess is a line, but basically bishop b7 followed by some sort of c5. Black has the bishop pair, down a pawn, has some play, and it's round equal here. But instead, he very quickly played d6, and I followed up with bishop to e3. I actually think in the game I played c3, but the DTT had a bit of an error, so bishop e3, bishop to g4, and c3. So this is the mainline variations. We're not going to spend too much time in the opening. But when rook e8, this is all kind of my preparation. h3, bishop to h5, knight bd2, still in my preparation. And now my opponent plays ED, CD, and knight a5. A little bit varying off with knight a5 here. I was not so prepared for this line, and as it turns out, it is a bit dubious for black. And I definitely don't think that Fidel had this prepared, or, I'm pretty sure he was just freestyling at this point. So I went bishop c2, retreating the bishop back, and now my opponent goes c5. So this is the first stopping point, and we're going to have many stopping points in this game. This is a very, very critical game that kind of leapfrogged my success in this tournament. And so very dynamic position, very complex, and a lot of different options that white has here. So I'm going to use it as a bit of a longer stopping point because there's a lot of tempting options that white might have in this position. And so white to play here. All right. So definitely when it comes to these types of positions, don't take anything for granted. Try to understand all the different kind of ideas that both white and black can play. Try to understand where the piece coordination is, how you can improve pieces, what breaks benefit black, what breaks benefit white, and kind of factor all those things together to make an informed decision. So definitely, it's not good to just spew out some lines here, because probably if you haven't kind of come up with that informed decision, informed thought process, probably it won't work out. Okay, so there's one variation here that I actually did not play, which is very good here for white, and it's the best continuation forward. And hopefully someone here can find that. Okay, so I'm gonna give everyone 5 minutes here. Remember to send your answers to me directly, and not to everyone in the chat. And then also, if you're very confident in your answer, you can mention to me with an exclamation mark or however you'd like, if you'd like to be called upon. Otherwise, I'll just call people at random who have some decent ideas. All right, so 5 minutes here. Give everyone a couple minutes. I'm seeing a lot of people give the same answer here. And I would challenge you to either dig deeper or look at that evaluation, but we'll talk about it too. So I'm gonna give everyone a minute to send in more answers, minute and a half, and then we'll discuss the various ideas here. All right. I think it was good enough time. I saw a lot of answers here in the chat, a lot of very interesting ones. So I'm gonna let I just remembered I have to unmute you guys. I'm gonna unmute Aryan, who will be the spokesperson for a lot of people who gave the same answer here.
Okay, so I said e5.
Okay, give the full variation.
Okay, so if knight d5 immediately, then bishop h7, king h7, knight g5, bishop g5, queen h5, bishop h6, bishop h6. Now g8-6 loses, obviously, and if g6, queen f3. So instead, if d5, then d5, knight d5, bishop h7, king h7, knight g5, bishop g5, queen h5, bishop h6, bishop h6. If g6, queen g5, and if g8-6, queen f7, king h8, knight e4.
Okay, and then after 94, like you're still down material here. So how do you think the position would continue there? I think you're missing something a little bit there.
Okay, so then rook e7, queen g6.
Yeah, that's looking a little bit promising, but probably black has rook takes e5, no?
Rook d1.
We don't really have a threat here. For example, like queen e7.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a promising attack. Don't get me wrong. But the thing is that for all of you, those of you who played like this whole line of bishop takes h7, is that you're potentially giving up what is a very, very comfortable position here, comfortable advantage here for white, for a very, very long variation where you're sacrificing a piece. And yes, it could work out. Yes, it could lead to a very dynamic advantage and potentially a winning position. But if it doesn't, you could be very well lost. And so what I would challenge you, I know this is not a real game for a lot of you guys, but if it is, this is your position, and you're going to be going for this T-stack line, you absolutely need to either calculate to the end where you're clearly better, or, you know, have some very, very confident line and evaluation and reasoning for that kind of evaluation. So yeah, I mean, E5, it's definitely something that should be calculated here, and this whole variation that a lot of people gave is very interesting, and I'll demonstrate it here. So E5 takes, all very forcing. This knight kind of has to go to D5. If it goes to D7, it's just no better than it is on D5, and also on D5, it's starting to take on E3 to capture the bishop pair. So bishop H7 here is the line that a lot of people were giving. Now King H7, Knight G5. Now there are some other lines to possibly calculate, maybe King G6 or maybe even King H6, which is a possibility, but probably not too reasonable. Bishop G5, I think, is the way to go. Takes, or sorry, not takes. Queen H5, Bishop H6. I'm gonna talk here. Takes, King H8. And here I had calculated to this point during the game, and I was just not too certain. Because the thing is that black's coming in with rook f8, black's coming in with rook e7. On top of that, even though black's king is precarious, white doesn't have any other pieces in the game. So that's why Aryan wanted to follow it up with knight to e4 or knight to f3. But for some reason, I just was not willing to commit to this position. It seems as if the computer is suggesting that king h6 here is crushing, probably because after knight takes f7, there's king to g6, and there's actually no follow-up here, believe it or not, because the queen's under threat as well as the knight is under threat. So that's another thing. Another thing is when you try to take your comfortable advantage and turn it into something extremely dynamic, is that sometimes you miss some things along the way. And so that's why you need to really grind out the variations and make sure that you're not throwing away your advantage for nothing. That's not to say you should shy away from these types of variations, because sometimes it is the way to go. Sometimes this is how you take your comfortable advantage and you turn it into a winning position. But in this case, it did not work out. Okay. So, yeah, and we can go d65. It's basically the same thing as e5. And it is more or less forced. The other kind of move here was d5. And let me go to Austin. Austin, maybe give that explanation as to why you were not attracted to the move d5.
Yeah, so this is like a Benoni structure. But the key difference is in the Benoni, the black bishop is usually really bad on c8. But in this position, black didn't play g6, and he already got in bishop g4, bishop h5. So the bishop is going to be able to go to g6, and that's going to make black's position a whole lot better. In addition, this knight on d2 is slightly problematic. Doesn't really have a great square to go to, and black already got in b5. But overall, I think it's just like a really good version of the Benoni, and I wouldn't really go for it.
Yeah, I think sometimes in this d5 structure, in the Rulu pad specifically, it is the way to go for white. However, in this position, as Austin has highlighted, the e4 pawn could become a sort of a weakness when black goes, like, let's say, bishop to g6. And the main issue for white is on top of this e4 pawn, the piece coordination is going to be a big issue. Specifically with knight d2, as Austin has highlighted. On top of the fact that the knight does not have much of a future because it has to defend the e4 pawn, it also has to cover the c4 square in the meantime as well. So d5 is not really a suitable option here for white. So the main course of action that white should really be calculating is dc5, dc5, and debating how this opening of the position has helped white and how white should now further coordinate their pieces. So here white has a very, very strong continuation that I just didn't even consider during the game at all. Like it's literally at all. We'll get to what I ended up playing in the game shortly. But the way that the computer gives, and a few people had actually suggested this later on after we started calculating bishop h7, is the move queen to b1. And the computer here actually, the computer, the weak computer does not even understand this move. But queen to b1, as it turns out, gives a +1 evaluation at a stronger depth. And it's very hard to immediately understand, especially from a human's perspective, as to why we would kind of move our queen out of the way for simply what seems like no reason. Now, we are threatening e5, and this is a very key point, that we're threatening e5. But the main point is that we're actually helping our piece coordination, as it turns out. Because the thing here is that we can't move this down to f3, which is actually why during the game I played g4, and we'll get to that in a moment. But because we can't move this knight on f3, on top of that, we also can't move the knight on f1 because of these kinds of exchanges on d1 and perhaps the bishop f3 as well. And so on top of the threats of e5, as well as the unpinning of the bishop towards the queen on d1, white will gain just so much more piece coordination. So a sample line goes from like h6, e5, knight d5, and now g4 is one way that we can go about this. But for example, if black also goes something, let's say bishop to g6, here I believe it's something like knight f1, was it? Or I don't exactly recall what it was giving here for white as a continuation. But yeah, probably just e5. Yes, this is what it was. Okay, because now at bishop takes c2, queen takes c2, and something like knight to d5. I believe we can even get away with bishop takes d5. Yes, yeah. So and now here on knight to d5, we can probably take, I imagine. Or is it yes, e6? Okay, not easy at all. Not easy at all. I think e6 is a bit more accurate for those of you who were giving takes in e6. I believe e6 is slightly more accurate, but nevertheless very problematic for black. So this is not an easy calculations at all, an easy idea at all. But if you put everything together, which is the problematic threat of e5 and all those calculations, all those variations that you guys were suggesting with e5, bishop h7, as well as the piece coordination and how white had some slight difficulties here with these two knights, as well as this pin on the queen on d1. All that combined together actually makes for some very, very dynamic continuation. Now, I think what you do have to see is after queen to b1, you do have to see this variation of e5 followed by e6. Otherwise, you can't really justify bringing the queen to b1 in this bishop to g6 variation. Because now you have the same issues as before. You can't move this knight because of the pressure on e4 as well as knight to c4. And so from that vein, queen to b1, it only can be backed up with strong, not only understanding, but also strong dynamics and calculation. So not an easy move at all, but it's the only move that gives white a decisive advantage in this position. And just apologies in advance, we will be going a little bit long here. I anticipate probably around till 5:15 to 5:20. So if you have to leave early, just keep that in mind, and that's totally okay if you have to leave at 5. Okay, so instead here I went g4. Really going towards my more so dynamic style here. Like I said, I didn't consider queen b1 at all. I thought that if I didn't do something drastic here, my piece coordination was actually very, very awkward. And black is going to be simply, let's say, playing like something like queen c7, rook d8. The development for black is actually a lot easier here than it is for white. So g4, bishop to g6, and now I followed up with knight to e5. So a very, very common idea that you'll sometimes see that comes along with g4 is to try to seize the bishop pair. And I really was not sure of what the evaluation was following this continuation, but I was ready for the complexities that it would follow. I was going to take on g6. I was going to even play f4, as we'll see in the game, and basically try to launch a kingside attack, as well as say that the bishop pair that I've gained will justify the kingside weaknesses that I've potentially created. So not a bad idea on my part, but my opponent responded very, very well here. Knight to d7, knight takes g6, pawn takes g6. Now I went f4, and now my opponent goes to very, very strong d4. Okay, so I did indeed exchange the knight for the bishop, and I got the bishop pair. I did indeed play f4, as I mentioned, to try to kind of improve my kingside play. And now here my opponent is basically trying to exchange off my dark square bishop, and that will make my kingside even weaker. So now I went knight to f3 to try to develop my knight, bring it over to the kingside. My opponent went bishop to c5, trading off the bishop pair. And here I made the very, very lackadaisical queen to e2. Okay, very, very lackadaisical queen e2. And what ends up being a mistake. So now we hit our next crossroads of black to play here. Okay, so queen e2 was basically just my way of defending the bishop on e3. I was going to replace my bishop on e3 with a queen so that my dark squares would still be covered, and then I'm going to bring my rook on a1 to the d file with rook a d1. To me, was a very, very logical move, and I spent like probably 1 minute on it. So I was still playing kind of my natural and intuitive style of play, and unfortunately just completely forgot about what black could potentially play here. So I'm going to stop here for let's give 2 minutes. Black to play. Remember to send your answers to me in the chat directly. Black to play, and how do they proceed? 2 minutes. 30 more seconds. All right. So a lot of people gave the best move, as well as some people gave a very, very interesting continuation, actually. But pretty much most people came to a couple of decisions here. So when it comes to approaching this position as black, what you really need to ask yourself is, how are you going to take advantage of the weaknesses that white has created? Okay. Because if you don't respond and if you don't react immediately here for black, I mean, white will have what will amount to be quite a strong attack. If you allow white to safely go rook AD1 followed by E5, followed by some type of F5 in the future, white will have a menacing attack on the king side. And given black's poor piece coordination, at least as of right now, black will have a very hard time defending that kind of attack. And so when you ask yourself what types of weaknesses that white has created here, specifically on the king side, as well as as it turns out, on the queen side. So here, black has the very, very direct queen f6. A fork. The f4 pawn due to the pin on the g1 king, as well as the b2 pawn. All right. So sometimes the most direct move is the way to go. Now it's not so easy here, and we're going to get to that in a second as to how I was going to respond to it. But I also want to note a very, very interesting idea that some of you guys noted, which if it were not for queen f6, would probably be the best way to go, which is some form of either c3 immediately or bishop takes e3 followed by c3. Now, positionally, this is a very interesting way forward. And like I said, if it weren't for queen f6, probably would be the best way to go. Because like I said, like I mentioned, if black is not able to do something either with white's weaknesses or with black's piece coordination, black will probably be in a lot of trouble with the king side kind of opening up. So c3 is actually something I had seen, and I was not too worried about it from white's perspective because I didn't really have too many other options in the position. But probably after something like c6, and you probably can't do it c6 here because I imagine maybe there's bishop c5 followed by b4 maybe as an option, but definitely you can try this. But the whole point is that you need to get the knight into the game. Otherwise, now on a5 has a bit of a long process to get back into the game. And so this sacrifice we're definitely happy with making, and it's something like queen x c3 rook to c8. It's another sacrifice that we're probably fairly happy to be making. But regardless, the move queen f6 is a very, very strong move, and something that unfortunately I had completely forgot about, completely missed. I came back to the bathroom after making queen e2 very quickly, and I saw queen f6 on the board, and I was very, very disgusted with myself because it was one of those moves that is completely avoidable. Now, granted, I did want to play queen e2 to patch up those dark square holes, but probably I could have gone something like king g2 or even bishop c5 immediately, and maybe I would suffer a little bit, but it would not be a big issue. So queen e2, queen f6. All right, the best move here, and looks like black will be winning a pawn. All right, well, it's time for white to put up some resistance. Okay, it's very, very important in positions like this that when you're hit with a surprise, a blunder, whatever it might be, that you do not fold. Okay, if there's one thing that I'm very proud of myself in terms of my play, it's my resilience. It's my resilience that even when I blunder, even when I miss things like this, I'm able to push forward. And it's a very, very important character trait to make norms, to win rating, to turn games that should be lost into drawn or sometimes even wins, like I did in this game. And also, it's that same resilience that in the first game that we saw I was able to push past my kind of disappointment with how I had tried to win that rook and pawn ending and found that kind of practical try. Okay, so be resilient here, everyone. Be resilient. White to play. Try to put some complications for black if possible, and try to make black's life slightly difficult. Okay, so I'll give everyone a couple more minutes for this position. All right. So it's a lot of interesting ideas thus far. So what I will say here is that when it comes to finding resilient play, trying to find resources on your own behalf, one thing that's very, very important to keep in mind is that when you're looking for these resources, they typically come in the form of you trying to find active play. And active play stems from good pieces, piece coordination, developed pieces. And so when you start with a move like bishop takes c5, my intuition tells me this is not going to work out. Because what you've done is you still have the b2 weakness and the f4 weakness. And all you've done is develop your opponent's knight for them. And so those resources that you're looking for, that active play that you're looking for, the tactics typically will not work out in your favor. Now, you can calculate, you can try to make them work. For example, something like queen e3. I saw a lot of people mention queen e3 because now what you're trying to do is attack the knight on c5 as well as defend the pawn on f4. That way, if the knight moves away, then maybe we can play something like, rook a b1 or maybe even e5. But here, what if black just takes on b2? Okay, the tactics didn't work out because the dynamics just weren't there. The pieces weren't there. Black simply takes the pawn, and because your pieces were not coordinated together, here the dynamics are not working out here. And so the first move that we should be looking at is something like rook a to b1. Okay, this type of move is very, very important and characteristic that it's the type of move that develops your piece, creates threat, and generally the kind of ideas will follow from that. So as it turns out, after queen f6 was played, I played rook a d1 without calculating much in a minute, because that's just what my intuition told me. I was like, if I'm going to find a resource here to save me, rook a d1 is the start of things. Now, perhaps a little bit, that's not the approach that I would recommend for all of you to play it so quickly. I would recommend calculating some things like trying to see if bishop takes d5 works, or seeing if, like, let's say e5 works or some other things. But rook a d1 was just my intuition, and it was correct in that sense. It was the most difficult way forward here. And the main point is that if black takes and tries to go for the same line, this is miles and miles different. This is totally different. Because instead of taking this knight on c5 with the queen, we're taking this knight with the rook on d7. So now after queen takes c2, we're now coming in with knight to g5, and now just crashing through. Something like rook to f8 is played. Now we go e5, e6, and we're going for checkmate. As I mentioned before, look at this knight on a5. On a5, now the queen on c2 even is sidelined, and all of our pieces are coming in for the attack. All right. So here, black plays a natural way to play, which is bring their own undeveloped rook and defend the knight. All right. So now let's keep that same energy. Let's keep that same energy and try to find the resource here for white. Okay. So white to play. I'm going to give everyone a minute and a half on this one. Keep the same energy and try to come up with the resources here for white. Yes, it's supposed to end at 5, so you're free to go if you'd like, but we're going a little bit over time today, just because I do want to get through the rest of this game. So, like I said, you're free to leave in case you need to, but, we're going to have a couple more points from this game before we end. Maybe before I end. All right, so white to play here. Give everyone a minute and a half. Send in your answers, what you think might happen here. All right, I like the energy of the moves. I haven't seen a poor move suggested so far, though there is one that I'm looking for in particular here. All right, so okay, so we're gonna go through the answers. Eric, remember to send your answers privately. But okay, so I will address a couple of answers before I'm gonna call on Leo in a couple minutes here. Okay, but I'm gonna address a couple of different answers. So a few people gave rook takes d7. Now this does keep that energy up that I was mentioning, but perhaps maybe a bit too energized here. I'm not sure how much this one I believe. For example, rook takes not rook takes d7, bishop d3, queen takes, rook takes, and then e5 was the suggested move here. Now certainly this is a very energetic play. White's going to try to go for f5 and some attack, and it actually is something that I seriously considered during the game because that's how kind of desperate I realized I was. But I think, for example, like queen d8 and f5, I just don't really believe it because even though black's pieces, I feel like black's pieces are actually quite well equipped to defend, but on top of that, white's pieces are actually not that ready for the attack, and on top of all of that, white's king is also still a bit precarious to some queen checks along some dark doors. For example, takes, and then let's say g takes f5. I don't know, like let's say knight c6, finally bringing the knight back from the rim. The e5 pawn is being attacked. It's definitely worth a consideration, but I think it's just too much. For example, if you try to be energetic with like queen e4, then all of a sudden queen b6 comes. Also, maybe even 95 works. Seems like it does. So it's just a bit too much. It's a bit unnecessary here as well because we have some other options. Okay. So another option that I saw here was knight d4, which is what I had spent most of my time calculating during the game. It's a move that I really wanted to work because I was like, wow, if knight d4 works, we not only stop queen takes f4, but we also stop queen takes b2, and now we're turning e5, and on top of all of that, we've improved not only our rook on a1, but also our knight on f3 to the center. But unfortunately here, our opponent has a very brute force way of counteracting this, and I was very devastated that this did not work out. Bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, and a very simple knight c6. Bringing the knight that's on a5 back into the game, and I just couldn't believe it. During the game, I just could not believe that this is such a caveman way of playing for black, but it turns out it works. For example, rook to d1, rook to d2, queen takes b2 is able to be played, and because our bishop on c2 is being hampered by our pawn e4, we just don't have any tactics that work out. For example, after e5, black goes queen to b4, let's say, and we just don't have enough. I spent a lot of time here actually trying to make this work, but we don't have time for f5, and it's just a bit unfortunate here. So e5 instead of rook to d2, well then here knight takes d4, and things are not working out well here for us. All right, so the last move, Leo. All right, so Leo, what was your idea here? Gotta find you to go. Okay, so Leo, what was your idea here?
My idea was to play rook d5.
Okay, so clearly you're trying to take the bishop on c5 and the queen takes b2, right? So what if bishop takes e3?
Then queen takes e3.
Okay, and if black takes on b2?
Then queen d2.
And what's the main point of this?
To attack the knights.
Very good. Very good. So you're forking both knight on a5 as well as knight on d7. But Leo, what happens after c3 there?
Then queen d3 or queen d1, and the knight on d7 is pinned.
Yes, it turns out the knight on d7, in fact, is actually pinned. Not only were we attacking the knight on a5 as well as the knight on d7, but the knight was pinned, and it is not easy to defend, or actually is not defendable. So rook to d5, very, very energetic with its ideas, as well as this very creative queen to d2 idea. And Fidel fell right into it. He immediately took on a3. He immediately took on e3, and then immediately played queen b2. And then after I played queen d2, all of a sudden he started thinking, which is not what you want to be doing here for black. Okay, so from black's perspective, from Fidel's perspective, he really should have taken a little bit more time here. especially because he was not expecting rook to d5. But he just kind of thought, oh, well, this is just Josiah being desperate. I'll take my free pawn and I'll run with it. Okay, so instead, I'll give everyone 1 minute here to try to understand and try to figure out what black should have done here. So instead of being hasty, instead of taking on e3 and taking on b2, what should black have played here? All right, Connor.
So I was thinking knight b7
Why do you think knight b7 is so powerful?
to defend the bishop, and I also have queen takes f4 at some point.
Yes. I mean, the main point here is that knight b7 defends the bishop and maintains the threats that we had before. The threats we had before of the f4 pawn as well as the b2 pawn. All right. So it's important in these positions as the black pieces to recognize the strength that you have in the position, which is targeting white's weaknesses. Now, of course, beyond targeting white's weaknesses, you need to make sure the tactics work out. And this is not what Fidel did. Fidel immediately just took and then took on b2 and thought that he was winning. And so, yes, as Austin points out, rook d5, all it did was attack the bishop in an energetic way. So what black should do is take the piece that's not in the game and defend the bishop. All right. Now, granted, his knight b7 move, it just seems unnatural because it's retreating. It's very, very kind of innocuous, you could call it. It just looks like a very strange move to play, but in fact is very, very powerful. Okay. All right. So rook to d5, takes, queen d2, c3, queen to d1 was played. And now the last stopping point that we'll have up today before we end, which is black to play here. All right. So Fidel spent a lot of time here trying to figure out what he should play, but did not play best. This was the last opportunity, the last chance where black was still fine, as it turns out, unbelievably, even though white has the menacing threat along the d file. So black to play, we'll take 2 more minutes here to see if you guys can find how black should proceed. All right, Andrew J.
I want to go knight c4 because rook takes d7 isn't really a threat because then I can go takes and then like knight a3 rook f8 and I'll start and this pawn's too strong.
Perhaps. Though I don't believe you, because for example, after knight c4, rook takes d7, rook takes, queen takes, rook f8. There, maybe I'll go. I mean, it's not a bad idea certainly, but let's say I'll go rook to e2, and if you go knight a3, then I'll go probably queen to d1, and I think I'm hunkered down there enough to stop your c pawn. But a good start. Knight c4 is a good energetic start. But it turns out knight c4 here, the idea after rook takes d7 is to in fact go knight to d2. Knight to d2. Keep up the energy. Look for the resources. Cutting off the connection between the queen and the rook. So now after like rook takes d8, rook takes d8. Now we're threatening knight takes f3. Knight takes f3 check, as well as threatening to simply take on a2 and start rushing these 3 connected path balls. All right, and so this is enough to be to have more than enough compensation for the piece. So instead, the game proceeded with rook to f8, a mistake. And here actually I played rook to e2, which still wins. Because the idea here is very simple. We're defending the bishop on c2 and going to take on d7 next. And then here he played knight c4 with similar ideas, but now I go bishop to b3 first. And he said that after c2, rook takes c2, dropping the queen back. He thought that after rook takes d7, he had knight e3 here. But very simply, okay, well, we just remove the attacker and then take the piece. So that's what he said he had missed. I'm not sure if that was actually what he had missed or not, but that's what he said he had missed. But instead rook e2, I should have been the one who was more energetic. e5, which would have been apparently even more killer, though I don't see this as being too human. Rook e2 still wins. It's just not as winning. But rook e2 still wins the piece, and I went on to win the game. All right. So, very crazy, complex middle game here. I definitely could have been in a lot more trouble if he had played after queen f6, rook to d1, rook to d8, rook to d5, knight b7, instead of the hasty bishop takes e3. So it's very important, from the white's perspective, right, to not be hasty in the queen e2 move, and to be aware of what weaknesses that I had in the position, and to be a lot more careful. And then from the black side of you, to not be hasty in the fact that, bishop takes e3, queen takes b2 seemed like it was a clean pawn, but the tactics were not working out, and the very subtle and the very strong knight to b7 would have been in black's favor instead. All right. So, definitely some interesting positions today from my tournament. We'll pick this up again in 3 weeks. March 18th is going to be my next scheduled lesson or next scheduled class, where I'll be continuing from the American Continental Championship and going over my next series of games. Up to this point, now I'm 3.5 out of 4, and in very good position to make my second GM norm. And as we'll see, I did a little bit more than that in this tournament. So, definitely looking forward to going over the next series of games in a few weeks. Take care, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Sorry for going a little bit long. We'll see next time if I'm able to manage my time a little bit better. But thanks for sticking around for those of you guys who did. And have a good rest of your Monday, good rest of your weeks, and I'll see all of you guys soon. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.